purpose of this video is to share the work that was inspired by my participation in the Shelburne Farms 2019 to 2020 Climate Resiliency Fellowship. I began in the summer of 2019 with two goals in mind. One, to utilize the new connections I had just made with teachers from all over the Northeast to plan and facilitate a regional 2-day youth climate retreat. And two, to use this retreat as an opportunity to develop an action plan for the youth lobby movement. For those of you who may not know, the Vermont Youth Lobby began in my classroom 5 years ago after a lesson on political lobbying. A student raised her hand and asked, "Do we, young people, have lobbyists?" I thought it was a great question, and upon further research, we learned that there were apparently no organizations that lobbied on behalf of the nation's youth. So we decided to start one. At our very first meeting, students had a long conversation about which issues they thought were the most important to organize around, and climate action emerged as the clear winner. For the past 4 years, students in the Youth Lobby have spent most of their time organizing and facilitating youth climate rallies held near the end of the legislative session. The purpose of these climate rallies was to educate and inspire young people to get more involved in climate action and to promote meaningful climate legislation in the State House. The rally included a march, speakers and performers, information booths, and an opportunity to meet and discuss issues that matter to them with their elected officials. As I sat on the shore of Lake Champlain during our July residency, I was able to reflect deeply on our journey and the many lessons that we had learned, not only about building a youth movement, but also about how to actually impact legislation. We learned that much of the agenda for the legislative session is already decided well before the session begins in January, and we knew we would need to get involved much earlier if we were going to have an impact. We also hoped that our work could inspire a larger youth movement throughout the Northeast. Throughout August, youth lobby officers batted around a number of ideas that were officially approved at our September 1st meeting. The list of initiatives included supporting and promoting the Youth Climate Strike on September 20th, organizing a Youth Climate Congress to physically demonstrate to legislators what was expected of them when the session began in January, an opening day press conference in January, multiple youth lobby days where students would testify on important climate-related legislation, and weekly Fridays for our future climate strikes. As you can see, it was an ambitious and rather audacious plan, but unfortunately the idea of holding a regional youth lobby conference was determined not to be a high priority. These students were determined to see the passage of meaningful climate legislation, and they were laser focused on that goal. On September 9th, I sat in the audience as a few of my youth lobby officers presented their work with a community of local activists in Shelburne, Vermont. My students were surprised and honored to learn that they would be sharing the microphone with famous environmental lawyer Gus Speth, and they walked away really energized and excited for another year of climate action. On October 20th, I took a different group of students to a meeting of the Climate Coalition, which is a group of organizations from across the state that are committed to helping Vermont meet its energy and climate goals. Students at this meeting learned more about 4 pieces of climate-related legislation that the coalition supported, and they brought this information back to the rest of the youth lobby crew at our next meeting. It was an extremely powerful moment as I watched a dozen young Vermonters critically analyze all 4 pieces of legislation before voting on whether or not they would endorse them. In the end, students endorsed all 4 pieces of legislation, but only after agreeing to share their concerns about each one in an open document. It should also be noted that students also discussed another proposed bill that was put forward by Progressive Senator Anthony Polina. This bill would claw back a small percentage of the Trump tax cuts for the wealthiest 5% of Vermonters and use this money to fund initiatives to reduce our state's carbon footprint. This was the only piece of legislation that the youth lobby supported with no serious concerns or conditions. After months of planning during numerous Zoom calls and bi-weekly Sunday meetings, youth lobby students, along with fellow activists from the Sunrise Movement and Extinction Rebellion, put out the call for students from grade school to law school to participate in the first Vermont Youth Climate Congress. What follows is the promotional video they put together to encourage students to sign up for the Youth Congress.
I'm a part of the youth lobby to take action for future generations, for my relatives, and for myself. We're all going to be impacted by the climate crisis, and the people, honestly, who are sitting in power right now might not be alive.
You have to treat the climate crisis like the house is on fire. So that's why I'm a part of Youth Lobby, because I feel like I need to be doing something. The climate crisis is an issue that's not just only certain people should be concerned about. It is our whole world. Everyone should be concerned. It affects everybody. I think it's really important that we all stand up for what we know is right and make sure it gets done.
Join us at the State House on November 17th at 1:00 p.m. Go to VermontYouthCongress.com for more information.
The event turned out to be a huge success that was covered quite extensively by both the local and national media. We partnered with a local videographer who captured the event.
Hi, I'm Iris. We're at the State House right now, and we're making a difference.
Today we're going to agree on climate action measures that this legislative body can make law of the state when session begins in January. Vermont's greenhouse gas emissions are rising, while emissions from all of our neighboring states are going down. This is not a hoax. Governor Scott and the legislature need to treat the climate crisis as the crisis that it is.
To see kids come from schools all around the state, to see elementary kids all the way up through students at Vermont Law School is incredibly inspiring. And there is nothing we need more than the youth of Vermont and all Vermonters to be pushing us as legislators to act.
Right now we're all split up into committee meetings. We're discussing the proposed solutions that we're going to pass today and then present to the legislature in the next few weeks. For me, it's inspiring to see how incredibly smart the younger students are. We're still supposed to be in school learning, and we're here to take it on because no one else is doing it.
Sometimes policymakers are resistant to change. Sometimes
Right now, we're hoping that people who've been chosen to report out from their committees to come up and share with us what you worked on in committee.
We also made the changes to join regional initiatives aimed at cutting transportation emissions and collecting revenue that can be used to invest in EV renewable infrastructure.
ban the development of new fossil fuel infrastructure. We also added to this and restrict the expansion or increased incapacity of pre-existing fossil fuel infrastructure.
First, we felt like the goal to achieve net zero, that deadline wasn't aggressive enough. So we decided 2032, net zero for Vermont.
The declaration that we created today say aye. Aye! All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it.
This movement is large and it is growing, and this isn't about me, and it's not about Lily, and it's not even about the event that we made here today, although it is very important what we did here today, but it's about what we're going to do after today, and all the kids who came here today and are leaving knowing that they have a voice and they can make a difference in the issues that matter to them.
This is our first step. The fight for climate action begins now. I'm excited to come back to the State House with our past climate declaration on January 10th when session begins, and I'm full of hope after seeing so many young people who are committed to demanding climate justice.
We were all pretty exhausted after that event, but as Lily pointed out in the video, our work was just beginning. On January 10th, students planned an opening week press conference where they spoke to the media and delivered their Young Vermonters United Climate Declaration to every House and Senate committee that was meeting on that day. Student leaders also delivered powerful testimony at a public hearing in the House Transportation Committee. I'd have to say one of my proudest moments was watching Hope and Lily stand in solidarity with the student protesters who had interrupted Governor Phil Scott's State of the State address. It would have been easy to simply take the compliments that were being given to them, but instead they chose to stand up for their fellow climate activists and speak truth to power, unrehearsed and unplanned. Check out how these two students diplomatically yet firmly held their ground.
Yesterday, did you hear what happened yesterday? You did, okay.
Yes.
The governor just started his speech, and I fear that was actually a step backward in our advocacy to address climate change. And you guys did the exact opposite. Besides the fact that your testimony was so good, so well done, so compelling, you have delivered it right. You know, Lily and I, it took some work to just to get this, but when you talk about what you guys have done, so this, you didn't just meet with us, this is a hearing. Okay, so we had a hearing with you guys. So that's what this is. Okay, and I just want to thank you again, and we will hang the poster.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I understand where you're coming from about the demonstrations that were held yesterday, and I would like to acknowledge that they were justified demonstrations, in my opinion, that the house is on fire, that we're living in a crisis, and everyone should be heard.
And that the direct action was led by youth who are putting in the hours just as we are, and although they expressed it in a different way and in a way that might be considered abrasive to some legislators, that it is an expression of genuine and justified concern, and in that regard, we're both coming from the same place in that we are both concerned about the climate crisis to a huge extent. Yeah.
Now, from November until the coronavirus pandemic hit, students were at the State House every Friday to remind lawmakers of their duty to act. Students were also called upon numerous times to provide testimony on a number of climate-related bills. And on Valentine's Day, students staged another press conference where they shared their, quote, love letter for the climate. Throughout the winter, we also began planning what we hoped would be the largest youth climate rally in our nation's history, which we were billing as a rally for climate action and a celebration of recently passed climate legislation. Our message to lawmakers was clear. You've made many promises to us over the past 4 years. We're asking you to keep your promise and do the right thing. Youth lobby members were introduced to the technique of bird dogging, and we began to follow every event that Governor Scott attended. Everywhere he went, we had a climate activist asking tough questions and demanding a more serious commitment to climate action. We discussed his arguments in depth, what was true, what was perhaps not, what we liked, what we didn't like. We knew that his signature would be needed if any of the climate legislation we supported could get passed. We also began thinking about how we might be able to educate lawmakers on the climate crisis. Student lobbyists have been told repeatedly how well they explain the issues, and were encouraged to get involved in their local communities and to meet with their local lawmakers. After discussing the ridiculousness of young kids being repeatedly asked to educate their own lawmakers on the climate crisis, we began to realize the potential for such an idea. We had plans to encourage youth lobby students from across the state to personally invite their local officials to a Bill McKibben speech that was slated to occur in March. Unfortunately, the pandemic hit right before we could make this happen. We were also excited to plan local screenings of the Climate Action Film Festival at high schools across the state. The first one we had planned was at Harwood, and we had just publicized it as the pandemic hit. I felt horrible for all of the hard work that student leaders had put into this, and was really disappointed that my local community lost the chance to have an extremely important dialogue. Since the pandemic hit, our work has slowed down a bit, but students have been collaborating on a film called When We Rebuild that they hope to push out soon. We have also organized our first in-person youth lobby meeting to discuss the future of the movement. Undoubtedly, recent events have emphasized the intersectionality of systemic racism and climate justice, and we are committed to creating a more diverse and inclusive movement. We were able to raise over $20,000 and we will be using a little over half of that to pay for a youth and democracy organizer, which we hope will help grow the movement and provide greater structure and organization. Students continue to fight for bold climate action and are watching anxiously as some of our endorsed bills make their way through the process.
The Global Warming Solutions Act passed through the House by a vote of 105 to 37. That means even if Governor Scott chooses to veto the plan, lawmakers can override his decision. The Senate will vote on the bill next week.
We have a ton of ideas moving forward. We're hoping to work with current Rowland Fellow and BBA civics teacher Jillian Joyce to develop a Southern Vermont hub of the youth lobby. We're also thinking about designing a school assembly program similar to the ones made by the Climate Reality Project and the Alliance for Climate Education. We'd like to partner with the Young Writers Project to promote more student writing about the climate crisis and continue to work with local videographers to produce inspirational and educational short films. We're also hoping to add these media pieces to our new and improved website. In addition, we will continue to explore and promote a comprehensive climate curriculum throughout the state and lobby hard for a universal civics mandate in all Vermont schools. Students also talked about organizing voting drives and supporting vote by mail initiatives. Finally, when the pandemic is over, we would love to host that statewide youth action conference and invite fellow climate activists from all over the Northeast. It's been a great privilege to work with these amazing young people, and it's amazing to see how motivated and engaged they can be. However, it's also important to keep in mind that behind every group of young activists is a community of adult allies who are doing everything they can to empower them. From the Children's March during the Civil Rights Movement to the Parkland students who called BS on establishment politics, there will always be, and there will always need to be, a room full of adults offering guidance, inspiration, information, and most importantly, pizza. There will undoubtedly be people who say teachers should not be getting kids involved in these adult issues, that we should simply focus on the basics. They'll call it brainwashing. They'll say it's too political. Some might even say we are causing our kids to become depressed. But it's not the problems of the world that saddens our kids. It's our inability to thoughtfully solve them. When we give students the tools to stand up and make a difference, we are teaching a curriculum of hope and action that will someday lead to a more equitable, joyful, and just world. Thanks for listening to the story of my work, and a huge shout out to all of the amazing Climate Resiliency Fellows. I learned so much in our short time together, and I can't wait to see each and every one of you in person soon.
I see the future faces of this movement. We need to take control of our future and shout this call to action to every corner of the globe. Act for our future!